Okay, so welcome again. So social inequalities and diversity. This is like two sides of the same coin. On one hand, we are always talking about reducing social inequalities, but on the other hand, for sure, diversity in the society is something that has a lot of potential for increasing its capacity in many ways.
You've disappeared, Jekaterina. Can't hear you.
No, I can't hear either.
Me neither.
Okay, now is it better?
Yeah.
I think
You're
we
back.
have one microphone that has a flat battery now, so we will share this one. Okay, so we have 4 presentations and different time zones. So thanks a lot for Jenny and Oscar who joined us from Australia. It's quite late there. So these 2 presentations will come first. And then we'll have a presentation by Rasa Pranskevičiūtė-Amoson and Lina Novickytė, and the last one by a team of researchers, Valeria, Virgili, Francesco, Seghezzi, and Stefania, Negri. So we will start from the COVID-19 and finish with the COVID-19. So we'll come a full circle and have 2 very interesting presentations in between. So, okay, and the format is the following, that, as I mentioned, you'll have up to 15 minutes for a presentation and then questions and answers. We have 2 hours, so I think we have plenty of time. And Jenny, the floor is yours for the first presentation, and I'll share it now on big screen so everyone can see it well. Please.
Okay, thanks very much, Jekaterina, and also thank you for the organisers for accepting my abstract. What I'm hoping to cover in the next 15 minutes is a bit of an insight into the inequalities that the pandemic restrictions highlighted in Australia. And so this is just a bit of an introduction of what I hope to cover. Basically, looking at 3 different types of workers: those who could keep working, those who could work from home, and those who were laid off. And it's based on some interviews that we did for the Life Patterns project, and I'll tell you a bit more about that later on. So on the 21st of March, or thereabouts, we had a 6-week national lockdown in Australia. Our borders were closed, our schools and workplaces were closed. The only things that remained open were those classified as essential services. The states and territories in Australia also locked down, and in some states the lockdown extended for quite a long time. In fact, in Western Australia, they didn't open their borders to the rest of Australia for 2 years. And during that time, it was very difficult for us to visit family and friends or go on holidays. Cafes, restaurants, clubs, those sorts of workplaces were shut down and the workers were made redundant. But despite that, or because of that, the death rate from COVID was very low in Australia. In fact, only 910 people died during 2020 of COVID. Sorry. Here we go. So I'm really focusing on inequalities related to occupation because, as we know from past experience, that recessions and other crises tend to result in long-term changes to employment conditions. Furlong and his colleagues in their book in 2017 talked about this quite extensively. And as Furlong said, there's a stratified labour market now in which a few people seem to be able to enjoy privileged security, while the majority exist under conditions of insecurity. In work that we did earlier using the life patterns data, Professor Wynne and myself found that university qualifications were no guarantee of permanent full-time work, and that the value of VET qualifications, vocational education and training qualifications, varied according to field, in that tradies tended to have full-time work, whereas other people in hospitality and sales didn't have full-time work. However, as Kallenberg has said a number of times, there's been an increase in precarious work across the occupational spectrum. So even people with highly skilled occupations tend to be employed on contracts rather than permanent work. So we had, as I said, the national lockdown. Oops, sorry, I seem to be going the wrong way. Sorry about that. So during the pandemic, employers encouraged workers to use up their leave entitlements. So they might have had some holiday leave or some long service leave, and they were encouraged to use that. But unfortunately, if you're on a casual job, you don't have leave entitlements. You get paid extra on your hourly rate to cover you for the fact that you don't have leave entitlements. But that means that you have nothing to cushion the blow of the immediate shutdown. In Australia, casual employees are what's called in other countries 0-hour contract employees. And so they can be laid off immediately. They get no redundancy pay. They are just, in the case of the pandemic, got sent a text message to say all shifts are cancelled, don't turn up for work. So they had nothing. And they're the ones that had to sort of immediately go and apply for unemployment benefits. Contract workers tend to have these rolling contracts where the contract ends and they get another contract and it goes on. And so if they're laid off and their contract ends, they would get redundancy payments and any accrued leave entitlements. And permanent workers are the ones, as Furlong and his colleagues were talking about, they're the ones with the secure jobs. They must be given notice. They can't be sacked immediately. They must be paid out their leave, and they do get redundancy payments. So because of the pandemic restrictions, it really highlighted these inequalities that existed already in the employment structure in Australia, but also generated new inequalities. Because office workers could keep working from home and they maintained their income. Essential workers could keep working, and in some cases they increased their incomes depending on what their job was. There was more shifts for security guards and more shifts for cleaners and those sorts of jobs. But non-essential workers who could not work from home were stood down. So they were the ones that bore the brunt of the pandemic restrictions. They were the so-called non-essential workers. And typically workers in these jobs, hospitality and retail, they're employed on a part-time basis, and they're usually employed on a casual basis, which meant that they had no leave entitlements to draw on. They had to register at Centrelink, which is a government agency for unemployment benefits, and this led to long queues outside Centrelink offices. If you can imagine that you receive a text that there's no work for at least the next 6 weeks, and we didn't know what would be happening after that, people immediately went down to Centrelink, and there was long queues. Hundreds of people queued up outside the Centrelink offices. And this made, I think it jolted the government into saying, okay, this isn't going to work. Our unemployment is going to spike very high. So they brought in a new payment called JobKeeper, and they increased the unemployment benefit. So the JobKeeper payment was paid to employers, and they decided who to pass the benefits on to. I've just given you an idea there of how much it was. Originally, it started out at $1,500 per fortnight, but that's a 2-weekly payment. But the bosses, the employers were paid the money, and it was up to them whether they passed the money on to their staff or not. And some of them did, and they were the employers that sort of did the right thing. But we do know of cases where, very famous cases where employers didn't do that and people were made redundant. The government also increased the unemployment benefit. They almost doubled it for 6 months because they realised that a lot of people who had never been unemployed before were suddenly going to be unemployed, and they wouldn't be able to survive on $565 per fortnight. For most people, that wouldn't even pay their rent. So they increased it for 6 months on the assumption that within 6 months, things would be back to normal. So the question that I'm seeking to answer in this paper is, how did the pandemic restrictions impact on social inequality in Australia? How did it impact on people's lives? And in order to answer that question, I'm drawing on this data that we collected for the Life Patterns Project. This is a longitudinal project that's been going now for 30 years. And we have 3 cohorts of people which we recruit in their final years of secondary school. Cohort 1 left school in 1991 and they're aged about 50. Cohort 2 left school in 2006, they're in their mid-30s. And our 3rd cohort, which we've just recruited, is due to leave school at the end of this year. The participants are surveyed regularly and around 40 participants are interviewed every 2 to 3 years. So I'm using data from cohort 2 because we actually interviewed them during September and October in 2020 when they're aged around 32 years. The semi-structured interviews took between 60 and 90 minutes, and we were really focusing on asking these young people how COVID-19 had impacted on them and their employment. So these are just the characteristics of the interviewees. We had 24 women. We had 33 of the people we interviewed had a university degree. Our sample is overrepresented in the fact that even in the broader sample that we have, the overwhelming majority have a university degree. You do tend to find that with longitudinal research that the people who stay in for the long haul are generally the better educated people. 35 of the 40 were employed, and they're the people that I'm focusing on in this paper. So if people could work from home, they said, well, it didn't really impact us. We still had the same income. Actually, we saved money because we don't need to commute to work, but we can't go out and we can't socialise, we can't go on holidays. So we're actually saving a fair bit of money. And these are people like professionals, teachers, university staff, accountants, draftsperson, architects, and office workers more generally. And I'm just going to give you a few quotes here. What came through in the quotes is this sense of feeling very lucky. They could work from home, so they didn't lose their income, and they felt lucky. One young woman said, we actually got bonuses this year, so I'm able to save a lot of money, and I do feel very lucky. Other people said that they quite enjoyed working from home. Of course, this was during the 2020 when the lockdowns in some states had ceased and in other states were continuing. This young man who lived in Sydney said, we're both working from home and we both enjoy it, except it's a bit hard to separate work from personal because the hours all kind of blend into one. And a young woman who was living with her parents in Sydney was talking about she needs to be a bit more responsible for them with her money. So actually not being able to go out has been a good thing because she can save money now. The second group are the essential workers, and that was mostly professionals in healthcare, police officers, also non-professionals who worked in healthcare, public transport workers and tradies. The building sites in Australia didn't shut down for some reason, and so all of the people involved in those industries kept their jobs. This is a police officer who said, we've been fortunate because we kept working. We've been able to save a lot more money than what we usually have. And we've actually saved enough for a deposit for a home, and so we're looking for a home. So this was sort of a sense that we're still getting our regular money, but we can't spend it on anything, so we're saving it. Other people said that they've been working pretty much as usual. As you can see here, another reference to lucky. We're in a position where work hasn't been interrupted. Things haven't changed too much because this fellow was a plumber. He said people still need plumbers. And people working in Brisbane said it hasn't really affected us much. We still go to work. And if we're this technician's working on different job sites, he just has to fill out a form when he arrives. This is a quote from a female ward clerk who's living in Melbourne, working in a hospital. And she says, even though I'm not financially secure, I'm more financially secure than a lot of people right now. At least I still have my job, and I'm not about to lose it. And a nurse and a doctor who both work in emergency said that nothing's really affected us. We still have our work. It's changed a bit, but we're still working. And the third group are the non-essential workers who couldn't work from home. And they're the ones who had to register for unemployment benefits, typically baristas, chefs, hotel workers, and an optometrist, which I thought was quite interesting because I would have thought she was allied health. But as she explained in the interview, the optometry practice only needed one optometrist to be on call for emergencies, and the rest of the staff were laid off. So a lot of the quotes were, since March, I haven't had any wage. We were shut down, but they got JobKeeper, so she was happy about that. But then she realised, great, I don't have to go to work, but I'm not sure I'm going to be able to afford to pay for everything, because their life and their lifestyle is based on a much higher income than the JobKeeper, which is about $750 a week. Another person said that they went on JobSeeker first, so the unemployment benefit, and then they got JobKeeper, so that was an increase in the payment, which was good. And then they were called back into work, and then their business shut down again. And so they had this constant back to work, off work, back to work, off work. Other people said that they didn't know what was happening initially because they were both got stood down. They had to use their annual leave. They also took money out of their superannuation, which was a special condition that the government allowed people to take $10,000 out of their superannuation in 2020 and 2021. Some people had no work for long periods of time, and they felt that their life was on hold for much of that time. And again, just some more quotes about how difficult it was being stood down when you're on a casual contract and not having any work. The other group that were adversely impacted were the contract workers. So even though they had high levels of education, they were working on contracts, and generally their contracts would be renewed. But during COVID, many businesses didn't renew their contract staff. And so they were quite shocked because they'd always expected that their contract would be renewed. And so it had some pretty devastating effects, like for this young man who ended up getting a job in Sydney, and so then he was separated from his partner for a long period of time because the border was shut between New South Wales and Victoria, so they couldn't visit each other. So some of the people that we spoke to were quite frustrated about the way their employer was treating them. They seemed to think that the employers seemed to think that they were doing these people a favour by passing on the JobKeeper, whereas other people felt that their employers were doing everything they could to support them and really going out of their way to help them through the period. It was tough. A lot of people who lost their jobs did it tough, but the people who didn't kept saying how lucky they felt. They realised that they were in a good position relative to other people. And so what we found from these interviews was that the pandemic highlighted the inequalities related to occupation and employment status. For those who took out their super, their $10,000 a year out of their super, this will have quite a considerable impact on their post-retirement income, because in Australia, you have to put the money aside in your superannuation, and then when you retire, that's can be converted to an annuity, and it's based on the amount of money you have at the end of your working life. So taking $20,000 out of your super when you're aged in your early 30s can have quite a severe impact in 30 years' time when you retire. So, as I've said, the impact of COVID-19 varied according to employment status, whether you're contract, casual, or fixed term or permanent, and also depending on the occupation. So you could be a casual cleaner, but you actually were better off than somebody who was on a contract and an architect, because the casual cleaner kept working and they, in some cases, got extra work. Precarious employment was exacerbated by the lockdowns. A lot of companies took the opportunity to change working conditions and just say, well, we have to give you shorter shifts, or we have to get you to do extra work at home and things like that, just to keep the business going. Participants who could work from home or essential workers were able to save them money. And so it was the precarious workers, those on casual contracts who were in non-essential businesses, who were most impacted. Oops, sorry, I just go back to that acknowledgement. That's acknowledgement of the Life Patterns Research Program that's been funded by the Australian Research Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jenny, for the in-depth presentation. And we now have some time for questions, a little bit less than could be expected. The presentation was a bit longer. But it's interesting to see that although we are in different parts of the world, but the processes that happened were quite similar. Yeah, for example, the job keepers' allowances paid to employers and not always reaching the employees and so on. So and now I give floor for questions. So people who are online can either raise hands or put the questions in a chat. And to those who are here, please raise hands. And I would invite you to ask the question from the place where I'm sitting, so that our presenters also can see the audience. So please. Questions? Daiva, please come.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Jenny. I would like to ask you which group of population suffered or experienced negative impact of COVID-19 in your country, because we know in Lithuania, young people, students especially, experience negative impact of COVID-19. Thank you.
Yeah, you're right. Because young people are typically the most precarious, the most vulnerable. They're the ones who are working casual shifts. And what was interesting for us when we did this research was that even people in their 30s were still working in those kind of jobs that you expect are for students only. So we have people in their 30s who are baristas who lost their jobs. Other cafe workers and chefs who lost their jobs. So it really was related to your actual job, not your education level, but your contract and the business that you worked for.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay. I see Oscar is typing. Oscar, you can also turn on the mic and ask now. Okay, maybe just a link or something. Okay, maybe Jenny, one question from my side. You mentioned that your project is on the life patterns. So, and you mentioned that you interview, it's a longitudinal study, and that you interview people continuously. So maybe you have also some preliminary results of later interviews, if there was some long-term impact on life patterns, or maybe some evidence from other research on the topic. So the question is about the longer-term effects, if these are lasting effects or just like one-off effects, and we can also forget about COVID and in the next conference not even talk about it anymore.
Yeah, we survey them every year. So this cohort has been surveyed between 2005 and 2022. So we have survey data. And in each survey, we ask open text questions where they write answers. So we do have some follow-up data from the broader sample, which is about 500 people. And the interviews we do, we haven't interviewed them since COVID. We interviewed our older cohort, our 50-year-olds last year, but I haven't done any analysis of that data.
Okay, and we have one more question, so please.
Thank you, Jenny, for your presentation. It was very interesting. I would like to ask if you noticed any gender-related differences of impact of COVID-19. I have in my paper some, how to say, good adoptions, like Australia's example of good adoptions for flexible hours, other issues, and those adoptions looks like that they were successful in decreasing gender pay gap. So maybe you saw in your research that working females, they even benefited from some social policies or other adoptions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. In this particular situation, we didn't see a difference according to gender, because the JobKeeper payment was a flat payment. It didn't matter how many hours you worked. Initially, everybody got the same amount of money. So we actually found that some people were better off when they got JobKeeper. And the reason for that is that they knew every fortnight that they were getting $1,500. Whereas if you're working as a casual, you might get 2 shifts one week, 6 shifts the next week, 1 shift the week after. So for a lot of people who were on very precarious employment situations, were better off during that period of time. But it didn't come up that there was a gender difference. Mainly because of the fact that the amount of money that was paid to people who were temporarily laid off was the same regardless of their job, their income. In Australia, unemployment benefits are also paid at a flat rate, so it doesn't matter what your job was previously, which is why the government had to rush in with JobKeeper, because people were going from an income of $2,000 to $3,000 a week to suddenly having less than $600 a fortnight. So the fact that a lot of people were impacted by COVID-19 and their incomes were impacted wasn't because of gender so much, but because of the actual occupation that they had and their vulnerability before COVID. The people who were already vulnerable before COVID were really those who were impacted the most.
Thank you very much, Jenny. I think that we have to move to another presentation. There's also a comment online from Oscar that there might be also differences based on industry, but I think we will come back to the COVID question at the end of the session. And now we move to our next presentation by Oscar Vorobjovas-Pinta from University of Tasmania, and it will be on celebrating diversity and belonging, and a very much European song contest where Australia is also taking part. So please, Oscar.
Thank you so much, Jekaterina, and it's a pleasure to be part of Social Policy Responses Conference. I'm in no means a expert in social policy per se. Can you hear me well?
Yes, everything works very well.
Awesome, cool. And I'm a tourism academic based at the University of Tasmania in the Department of Sociology and Criminology. And today I'm approaching diversity through events, I guess, and in this case I'm looking at the Eurovision Song Contest, which I know is widely watched in Lithuania as well, as I follow it through, as well as Australia, as you say, because obviously we're just next door to Europe. All right. So I'm sure that most of you know what Eurovision Song Contest is all about, and there's actually quite a bit written about it from various angles, from diversity, from policy and politics, as well as creative arts and arts in general. So this presentation really comes about because a couple of years ago I was approached by a publisher who really wanted an edited book on Eurovision Song Contest from the tourism and leisure perspective. And we are, as you can see by the deadline there, obviously we had a call for abstracts back about 2 years ago in 2021, and we're about to finalize the book, and we are hoping that it's going to be published next year. So we have a wide variety of chapters in there. So keep an eye for it. I'm sure if you follow me on social media, like X or Twitter, LinkedIn, I'll be publishing that there, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be a good one. Oh, I'm not sure why it's going backwards, so let me just try again. Here we go. So, as most of you know, Eurovision Song Contest was created back in 50s, so 1956. And a global myth was basically that it's all about uniting Europe in post-Second World War. It was all about promoting unity and cultural exchange in post-war Europe, when in reality, Eurovision Song Contest was just to actually promote the advancements in technology and show the capabilities of television back then. This contest itself was inspired by Sanremo Music Festival in Italy, which I'm pretty sure you would be familiar with. Over the years, obviously, the purpose changed and improved and all of that. And it really showcases the musical talent from European countries as well as Australia. Australia is at the moment in negotiations on renewing their contract with EBU, and we're really hoping that we will continue to be part of Europe, at least through this contest. It obviously fosters international cooperation as well as understanding, celebrates diverse cultures through music, unites nations in a friendly competition, and so on and so forth. And Eurovision, as you might know, is also often used as a soft power in light of political contexts such as those of obviously current war in Ukraine, and others as well in the past. So I'm looking at the very particular angle today. I'm looking at the diversity and particularly looking at the queer identity, because Eurovision is very often associated as a queer event, but it was not always like that when it was created back in the 50s. Probably the major turning point for queering, if I can say, Eurovision was in 1998 when Dana International won the contest with Viva la Diva. I believe. I won't sing for you today. And it basically marked the departure from conservative roots towards celebration of diverse music and identities. And it really became kind of, it started blurring the societal norms and sparking questions about sexual identity overall, highlighting the fluidity and diversity of human experiences as well. And it played quite a crucial role as well, as you will see later on from my snippets of the interviews, that it played quite a pivotal role in self-discovery and understanding of queerness of certain of the respondents that I spoke to. And it kind of really mirrors this reflecting the possibility of being able to live authentically and unapologetically as well. Because Eurovision Song Contest is basically broadcasted to a wide audience of European nations, you know, from Iceland to Azerbaijan, Armenia, and all those countries. Obviously, there are varying degrees of diversity in those countries as well. And every now and then, when, for example, Eastern countries such as Azerbaijan or back in the day Russia would win or Turkey would win Eurovision Song Contest, there would always be those questions of LGBTQI plus inclusivity and tolerance in those countries. So that soft power kind of carries on over beyond Eurovision Song Contest as well. So really, if we look at this quote by Lemish back in 2004, Eurovision became appropriated as a gay celebration and turned through social practices and interpretive strategies into an empowering festival. And very often it is referred to the Eurovision Song Contest as a gay Olympics as well, which was part of the question that I actually asked to my participants, whether they do believe that Eurovision Song Contest is a queer Olympics or gay Olympics. And surprisingly, a lot of them disagreed with that characterization of Eurovision. They tended to believe that Eurovision is for everyone, not just queer people, which was kind of great. Now, looking at my approach to this research, I've applied neo-tribal theory, and neo-tribal theories quite a recent theory if we look at it, developed by Mafasoli in 1980s, and it didn't really take off until 1990s, until it was translated from French into English. And it's primarily applied in sociology as an alternative to the theory of subculture. And it really looks and it really explains that people belong to various neo-tribes as they progress through their lives, and they can be members of various neo-tribes simultaneously, and they can kind of come and go as they want, where subculture is a bit more set in stone and it's not that easy to change over time. So neo-tribal theory is defined by fluidity, reflexivity, and individuality versus the cultural dominance, uniformity, and class-based theory of the subcultural definition. And basically, neo-tribal theory possesses 4 qualities, and that's something that I've done part of my PhD back in the day. And those 4 qualities would be, or 4 elements would be shared sentiment, fluidity in membership, rituals and symbols, as well as the need for space, and that space can be online space or can be physical space, and so on and so forth. And the reason why space is in red there is because that was the main focus of my PhD back in the day, as it was not as I guess much known about the role the space plays for the neo-tribes. So what I did methods-wise, so obviously I'm a qualitative researcher, and I've conducted semi-structured interviews with 17 participants from 4 countries. So Australia, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, so pretty much Australian and Baltic perspective there. This was part of a much larger study that I was doing, because my main interest was to see how Eurovision also shapes the national identity of participating countries. So I actually had far more participants in this study, but I narrowed down it to 17 because one of the questions was about the sexual identity, and 17 of those participants identified either as gay men, lesbian, or queer or bisexual, as you can see on a slide there. And obviously I'm based in Australia, so interviews were conducted via Zoom earlier this year. And I've conducted thematic analysis, and the four overarching themes were liberation and empowerment, community and belonging, representation and visibility, as well as identity negotiation. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to go through each of those themes and just show you the quotes that my participants came up with. So the first
Oscar?
one, sorry.
Just time-wise, like 5 minutes more or less, so that we still have time for questions. Thank you.
Awesome. I do talk a lot, sorry. So liberation and empowerment. Obviously, there was lots of mentioning about Baltic states in particular being conservative, as the example there by Emils from Latvia. And that Eurovision really provides to him a liberating experience, and that it allows him to forget where he actually lives, and it provides this escape, right? Well, at least for that 1 week of Eurovision. Some likened it to religion as well, next to Christianity. I know Lithuanians would disagree because the first religion or second religion in Lithuania is basketball. That's what I've heard. Community and belonging. Again, it's about celebrating those moments together as well. And there's quite a difference between people who actually attended Eurovision in person and those that were watching it at home. So for those that attended Eurovision in person, it was pretty much like a Mardi Gras, which is a pride celebration, I guess. So it's lots of it's very queer, lots of rainbow. And you can also see that over the years, broadcasters also inserted elements of queerness into the presentation or hosting of the Eurovision Song Contest as well. In particular, if we look at those Eurovision contests hosted by Sweden and Israel. The next one is representation and visibility, obviously, because it's watched by millions of people all around the world, not just in Europe, Australia, New Zealand, China, USA, Canada, and beyond. So it's also a great platform to transmit the diversity and provide that visibility to various communities. So for example, not long ago, Netherlands had the first transgender host, the Nikki Tutorials, who's quite a famous influencer. So it's a great platform to transmit the diversity as well, as I just quickly go through those quotes on my slides. And as well, it provides a platform for identity negotiation. So in particular, if someone has grown up in a regional area or somewhere where being gay is frowned upon, watching Eurovision would probably make them realize that this is a fairly normal to be who you are. And as I researched quite a lot about the Pride events in rural Australia, that's kind of very typical to hear those kind of quotes as well. And it's also kind of shows that it's okay to admit about, it's okay to talk about your sexual identity, as we have more and more queer participants who are not necessarily have queer performances, but they are open about talking about their sexuality. As, for example, the representative that won the contest for the Netherlands a couple of years ago. So really to kind of summarize those themes all together, if we look at Eurovision, we see that it's about camp aesthetics, and it embraces its kind of carnivalesque type aesthetics, and through the extravagant costume, gender-bending acts, flamboyant choreography, and so on and so forth. Challenging norms through semiotics, so challenging norms, notions of gender and sexuality, embracing fluidity and ambiguity, as well as debating about inclusivity beyond gay men. So now there's a lot of conversations in the background saying that Eurovision went way too gay, but what about all the other letters of the acronym LGBTQI+, so lesbian, trans, and so on and so forth. So it kind of camp is an enduring kind of queer aesthetic and cultural classification there as well. So, and if we look at Eurovision through that newer tribal space that I mentioned very briefly before, it does foster that sense of community, to be among like-minded others. The Eurovision only happens for 1 week, but online platforms are available there for the whole year, and there are discussions all year round. So you really are involved and you're part of that community, and continues to be called the Gay Olympics as well. Now, there's some, I guess, opportunities for Eurovision to improve as well. There's conversations around superficial engagement with queerness, so kind of countries now thinking that they have to send queer acts to be relevant for the Eurovision as well, and engaging is kind of wrong type of narrative as well. And usually why they do that, because obviously performances influence the voting, and those voting patterns then perpetuate stereotypes as well. So if queer acts usually get high, if they get highly ranked, obviously for countries that really want to win, they would try and build something like that for the following year as well. So I think I'm running out of time, and I see that you have a microphone in your hand already. So I'm just going to say thank you, and you're welcome to follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Okay, thank you very much. You can hear a round of a little applause here in the auditorium, but still. So thank you for this presentation and of this demonstration of giving voice to a diverse group of peoples and to queer people in a literate way. It's a song contest. So, okay, so now the time for questions. Are there any questions online? Again, I will say that those for you who are online, you can just raise hands or put your questions in the chat box. And those here in the auditorium, sorry, we don't have a rotating camera here, but still, so questions? Okay, please.
Hello, thank you, Oscar, for a so nice presentation. I'm Lina from Social Policy Department, and wanted to ask, my impression of Eurovision was always that it increased stereotypes. There are very feminine and very masculine performers as well. What do you think about these contradictions that queer performers, I see like more exception than a norm in the Eurovision. Much more often I recognize this stereotypical masculinity and femininity celebrations. And of course, pop songs about love and so on. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Lina, for that. Yeah, you're right. And I think the interesting thing about Eurovision is probably it's so well marketed that you see, depending on who you are, you see what you want to see. So for queer people, obviously they will be seeing queer performance, right? For someone who is interested in, I guess, the questions of femininity and masculinity, probably that's what they would see as well. It's worth mentioning as well that Europe is quite big, right? So if we look at the also the distribution, or if we look at the distribution of the acts that are being sent by the country, we would see that a lot of those stereotypical masculine or stereotypical feminine acts would be sent often by Central and Eastern Europe as well. I'm pretty sure you'll remember the butter pressing lady from Poland a couple of years ago, which was already sexualized. We always have singers from Greece in oiled torsos and all of that. So obviously sexuality and sex overall sells as well, and obviously it can't be just queer, right? Maybe actually you posed an interesting question. Maybe it's actually looking at Eurovision through the lens of sexuality overall, not just LGBTQI+, but why Eurovision is getting so sexualized in general. Yeah, I'm not sure whether I answered the question, but yeah.
Okay. Lina notes that it did answer her question. So
Awesome.
any further questions or comments? Okay, there is another question. 1 second here in the audience. And I see in the chat there is nothing so far.
Hi, Oscar. I'm a former student here at the Faculty of Philosophy, and I'm also a huge fan of Eurovision, and I have a lot of queer friends who are experts in this, and they host like quiz shows on this and so on. So it's really great. I think an interesting topic to explore would be why like some very conservative countries, I would say, are very keen to win Eurovision. Like when Russia was allowed to participate, they would always create a huge show with lots of money, and like countries like Azerbaijan also. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to see like this dichotomy, like it's a very queer show, but even the conservative and countries are very into it. So maybe it would be great to hear some perspectives from people who live in these countries as well. So yeah, that's more of an observation than a question. Sorry about that.
No, but it's a good one, and we are actually just about 2 months ago, a month ago, I was in Sweden, and we did present on that very topic of why Azerbaijan would want to host or would want to win Eurovision so badly, right? It's the very same reason why Qatar and why Saudi Arabia want to host FIFA World Cup, you know? It's about showing that they are part of the world, that they are somehow inclusive, and so on and so forth, right? So it's really part of this soft power and showing that they're not that bad, when in reality we know what the realities are, right? So it's really interesting about Azerbaijan in particular, when they won back in, I'm a fan, but I don't remember the dates that well, in 2010s, I think. And the whole question about the safety and security of fans who were traveling, because we know that predominantly fans that travel to Eurovision are part of the LGBTQI+ community. And there were instructions actually how to respond to fans' behavior as well, and that the fans were probably allowed to do touch bit more than what actually the local community were allowed to do. So there's definitely double standards, and Eurovision, as any other mega event, would be used as soft power.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Okay, then I will use my privilege to ask a question, but maybe more a conceptual one. So you use this neo-tribal space theory, and I think it's very useful when we are talking about queer identity, where people kind of identify themselves with the tribe, with the group. But the focus of my research is on poverty, inequality. So, for example, do you think this theoretical framework can be useful, or maybe there is some other way to conceptualize how the voice could be given to other groups where people don't identify themselves to the group. So the poor, the unemployed, and so on. So also in the audience here, we have a head of the National Anti-Poverty Network who tried to give voice to the to poor people, and I know that it's quite a challenge. So what would be your perspective on that? Sorry, this is a little bit out of topic question, but still maybe some of your reflection.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's probably a bit out of my league as well, as I don't know that much about poverty and the research is done in that space. New tribal theory in itself really focuses on individualism, and it really has these kind of those kind of slight commercial tendencies as well. So new tribal theory, it was applied firstly in sociology, right? But then it took off in marketing and economics. You know, it's really about cultivating neotypes around particular brands. For example, the papers that are written on, you know, people who drive minis, the Mini Coopers or Volkswagen, the Beetles. You know, they kind of create those groups of people, and then they purchase particular products, and then you know, they talk about where they service their cars and all of that. And the same about various other brands, like more niche, like for example, people who do climbing and all of that. So to be honest, I'm not entirely sure how neotribal theory could be used to tackle the question of giving voice to people who are disadvantaged, so those that are in poverty, because it's really about creating. I don't believe that you can have a neotribe that, and the only defining quality would be just because you're poor, you know. So I don't think that that's probably the best framework to actually approach that question, if I was honest.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. Okay, so thank you very much, Oscar. I think there are no questions in the chat, so we can move on. Thank you very much for the presentation, and also it was very nice to see that your research gives a lot of voice to people from the Baltics, which is amazing. Okay, so thank you very much.
Ačiū labai.
Ačiū labai. Okay, thanks. And now we move to the next presentation, also on the issue of gender, but in a different way, the equal pay and its gap, by Rasa, Pranskevičiūtė-Amoson and Lina Novickytė. And Rasa is here in person, so I will now help her to put on the presentation. So this one, okay. Okay, and now we will share the presentation, share the screen, and I think we are almost there. Okay, yeah. I think that should be now visible. So please, Rasa, the floor is yours, and the mic is also yours.
Is it okay if I sit, because I still don't get how to navigate in space because you're in between physical and virtual spaces. So I will sit. Yes, probably it's okay. Yes, I will be visible. So hello everyone. I'm very happy to be a part of this exciting conference, and thank you for organizers for your hard work and to make this event happen. And as you see, there are two names on the slide. So I will present myself and my colleague Lina. So me, I am Rasa, and I am affiliated to Vilnius University, Faculty of Philosophy. The conference is happening in this faculty, and my colleague Lina Novickytė, she is employed in Government Strategic Analysis Center. The paper, our paper presents the results from this Government Strategic Analysis Center research, which was implemented in 2022. And it studied gender pay gap reduction measures applied or proposed to be applied in the business sector in Lithuania. And the results of research, they applied to the agenda of Ministry of Social Security and Labor of the Republic of Lithuania. And so else. Because it does with this one, yes. So I try to press and yes, it does not work as well. Tai gal kažkoks trukdžiukas buvo. Okay.
We came back. Sorry.
We came back. Okay. I hope yes, it works. Yes, thank you. Today I will talk about a couple of sub themes. So in the beginning, I will talk about general information on gender pay gap, and also I will look a little bit on gender pay gap during COVID-19, CD countries and Lithuania. And I will present research like a forecast for gender pay gap related to COVID-19 and also gender pay gap reduction measures which were suggested for business sector in Lithuania. And for methodology, we used a combination of various methodological approaches and methods. So for determination of reasons of gender pay gap in Lithuania, we used Blinde-Oksaka decomposition method. And also for to make a forecast for gender pay gap, we use multiple regression model. We also use quantitative data collection and analysis methods and as well qualitative data collection and analysis methods. And we used data for quantitative data collection analysis, mostly based in for Lithuanian situation. And if to talk about general situation on pay gap and the main message is that we need many years to reduce this or to get rid of this gender pay gap. And the issue of gender equality has been widely studied by researchers and practitioners in order to assess the gender impact and contribution to the development and progress of country and region. And for example, Guillain in 2021, when forming future foresight towards the year 2030, allocates a separate topic in which he examines the importance of gender equality and its role in the development of countries. And he emphasizes, it's his quotation, that women's wealth grows faster than men's. And it is likely that by 2030, women will own more than a half of all the world's goods. However, by approaching 2030, trends in improving education and declining fertility will widen the gap among 4 categories of women. Childless women, single mothers, married and divorced women. And the global economy incurs a high cost of underutilizing women's skills, potential experiences, and productivity. Global wealth could increase by the aforementioned 160 trillion United States dollars if women played a greater role in the economy, held higher paying jobs, and receive the same compensation as men. And it is estimated that women are the main source of talent and productivity in the Europe and Central Asia region. And the potential economic benefit of gender equality in the labor market is significant. However, women's participation in business sector is still minimal. And on the other hand, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought about some changes in the field of gender equality. Another generation of women will have to wait for gender parity, according to the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report in 2021. As the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic continues to be felt, closing the global gender gap has increased by a generation from 99.5 years to 135.6 years. And the report of 2022 shows a slightly brighter tendency, when gender income gap is expected to decrease after 132 years. However, the researchers note that the COVID-19 crisis has had a much greater impact on women's participation in the labor market, as many of them have been forced to withdraw from the labor market and devote more time to the household issues. A negative trend was observed when, especially at the beginning of the crisis, the employment rates of women fell and the number of women in managerial positions decreased. And in 2008, more men than women lost their jobs during the global crisis. One reason was that relatively more men worked in industries hit by a standard recession, such as manufacturing and construction, while female employment was concentrated in less cyclical sectors, such as healthcare and education. In contrast, the COVID-19 crisis has affected service occupations that employ more women, such as service and hospitality, retail sector. This negative change is attributed to two factors. The disproportionate impact of the pandemic on sectors that tend to employ more women, and the disproportionate burden of for working mothers of kindergarten and school closures. And the COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in the closure of schools and kindergartens, as we all know, and that has led to a massive increase of childcare needs, which has a significant impact on working mothers. In particular, this situation can have a negative impact on working mothers seeking to return to the labor market. And OECD studies in 2021 show that during the COVID-19 period, comparing to 2019, like the fourth quarter in 2019 with first quarter of 2021, women's labor market participation and employment rate decreased more than men's. Mothers were almost 3 times more likely than fathers to stay, that we took on most or all of the additional unpaid childcare work after kindergartens and schools were closed. And longer periods of school and kindergarten closures led to greater gender gaps in care area. However, there are also positive aspects of the pandemic that can ultimately promote gender equality in the labor market. Alon and all note that the economic decline caused by the COVID-19 outbreak has significant implications for gender equality during the recession and subsequent recovery. Compared to normal recessions, which affect men's employment more than women's, the decline in employment associated with social distancing measures has a large impact on sectors with a high share of female employment. In addition, with the closure of schools and daycare centers, childcare needs have increased dramatically, with a particular strong impact on working mothers. Nevertheless, the author also emphasized the positive consequences, which can ultimately promote gender equality in the labor market. First, companies are rapidly adopting flexible working arrangements, which are likely to continue in future. And second, there are also many fathers who assume the primary responsibility for childcare, which undermines social norms that result in an unequal division of labor between housework, that is the cooking, cleaning, and childcare. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, applied widespread adoption of more flexible working arrangements, such as remote work, childcare subsidies, and this was an example of Australia, South Korea, Norway. Changes in social norms regarding fathers' involvement in childcare and housework have resulted in that gender pay gap was decreasing in individual countries. So the author is Diankov and other colleagues. And OECD in 2021 also highlights that effective management of crises such as COVID-19 requires a social policy response that includes greater public investment in quality childcare, education and support, and other non-school services, extending parental leave for fathers and encouraging them to use it to ensure equal opportunities for women and men to obtain and use remote work opportunities, prohibiting the provision of possible penalties, that is to say career opportunities, salary increases, aimed at persons using this form of work. And now we can come to Lithuania. So when analyzing the gender pay gap in Lithuania by the type of economic activity during COVID-19, it can be seen that during 2018-2021, the biggest gender pay gap was in financial and insurance companies, 32.1%, and you can see 32.1%, 36.3%, 33.8%, 34.3%, and in the sector of information and communications. Also, you can see data. And the overall gender pay gap decreasing during 2018 and 22, and in 2022 was 11.1%. And the pay gap has been influenced by socio-economical factors, the distribution of men and women by types of economic activity, professions, education, age, length of service. Analysis of a gender wage gap by sector and age of workers shows that the larger pay gap is prevalent in the private sector. And in 2021, the biggest pay gap between women and men was also in the group of workers aged 35-34. It was 16.8%, and the smallest over 65 years old, 6.1%, and 55-64, 7.9% in the age of group of employees. And the analysis of employment of women and men shows that no significant changes are observed during COVID-19. It should be noted that during the COVID-19 period, the employment rates of women with basic education and primary education with professional qualifications decreased. This is related to the fact that during the COVID-19 period, when various restrictions were applied and the activities of individual sectors were stopped, women working in lower skilled jobs lost it. And meanwhile, among men, the indicators of this education type increased, which is association with the demand for services in individual sectors, logistics, parcels, food. And men are the main workforce in these sectors. And it should be noted that the employment rates of highly qualified women and men did not change. Possibly highly qualified work can have workplace flexibility features, remote work, and this allowed to keep the job and combine work and home obligations during distant learning in schools and kindergartens. Additional analysis of the monthly changes of employed women and men provided by the employment service and percentage of unemployed women from women of working age and percentage of unemployed men from men of working age shows that during the fourth quarter of 2020 and first quarter of 2021 year, a greater difference is visible. The ratio of unemployed women to working age women is higher than that of unemployed men. The representative of the employment service points out such differences, stating that, it's quotation, the portrait of an unemployed Lithuanian citizen has changed over the year, and the quarantine highlighted changes in the structure of job seekers. One of them is now that the majority of those who have lost their jobs are women. Before the pandemic, for many years, it was men. So women make up to 50.3% and men 49.7%. It was in April 1st. And in the same period, last year, in the same period, men dominated among job seekers. They accounted for 51.5%, women 48.5%. However, as the data shows, the largest difference between unemployed women and men during the pandemic was 6 percentage points to the disadvantage of women. And yes, okay. And in European Union, so here it's for forecast. What I want to say that our research, our forecast later was supported by the data of state data agency. So we can analyze maybe on discussion this information. And in European Union, for each worked hour, women in average earn 13% less than men. And gender pay gap reflects certain inequalities between women and men in the labor market, horizontal and vertical segregation, a higher share of women than men in atypical and unstable jobs, the double burden of paid and unpaid work, family burdens, mostly borne by women, and other stereotypes. And given the fact that gender pay gap still exists, various measures are proposed to reduce the pay gap. And I will go to Lithuanian situation. Here we have, so for Lithuanian colleagues, it will be easier to see. I will, for English speaking colleagues, I will translate, will tell shortly about measures which were suggested to Minister of Social Work and Social Care. So evaluation of measures to reduce the gender pay gap, which are widely applied by individual states and business enterprises, was implemented. Later, a list of possible measures aimed at reducing the gender pay gap in the context of Lithuania has been developed, referring to the evaluation of these measures. So I just tell the titles of these measures. First group is identification, evaluation of a situation in the company in terms of a gender pay gap, identifying the causes of a gender pay gap, performing equal work or work of equal value, identifying the reasons of explained and unexplained pay gap. Other group of measures is planning. So that would be provision of measures to eliminate the reasons of unjustified discriminatory gender pay gap in the plan of actions of a policy for equal opportunities, determination of the deadlines and performance indicators for the implementation of a plan of actions of a policy for equal opportunities, appointment of individual responsible for the implementation of these measures, training for managers. Another group is transparency of salaries. Other group, accountability and publicity. So that would be establishing periodic reporting for the implementation of measures of plans of the actions of the policy for equal opportunities and ensuring public visibility of reports. The other group is unbiased selection criteria, application of non-discriminatory unbiased selection criteria during recruitment. And one more group, objective evaluation of employees' performance. So that would be application of objective, unbiased, non-discriminatory criteria in evaluating the performance of employees, creation of equal opportunities regardless of gender to pursue a career, to be transferred to higher positions. And the last group is ensuring work-life balance, ensuring equal opportunities for women and men through means of work-life balance. And I will not give conclusions. I talked about this during the presentation, but Lithuanian colleagues could get acquainted more with the research and results in the already published report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rasa. I think that you may probably stay here, and I'll put on the screen so that we can see the colleagues who are joining online in case there are questions. So as always, please raise hands if you want to ask questions, and or write in the chat function. So thank you very much, Rasa, for the presentation. A lot of data there. So yes. So questions. Are there any questions either online or in the auditorium? Everyone is overwhelmed, still processing information. Please.
Aiste from Lithuanian Anti-Poverty Network. I have a conceptual question. Like you talked about, working and pay gap, but do you see a change? But is related to homework, that women are supposed to do. Do you see any changes in the mind of society and men that they work more at home, help women, or they share the homework more? So because pay gap depends also on how the women are involved in the home. How can they yes, how balance between work and and home.
Thank you.
Yeah. Maybe I actually had a very similar question, so I will just add to this so that you can answer both. Because there is in your presentation, you see, if I understood it correctly, that the gap will reduce over time, but it's mostly due to the structural changes. But my question was very similar. So, do you see any change which would be due to this flexibility and remote work? Because there is a lot of now literature on flexibility paradox, that actually women now have often a double burden of both working at home and looking after kids at home at the same time, and on self-exploitation and increased working hours, reduced balance between work and home. So very similar questions. So how do you...
Thank you. Thank you. I talked a little bit, and also like when you ask about, do you see? Yes. So I presented research which was done during COVID and maybe right after COVID. So we cannot have like tendencies. Yes. If we cannot say if it's a short time change, like which was caused by changing of situation, our context, but we were just forced to be at home. Yes. So what was noticed that men were getting more involved in household issues, household chore issues, and there is a possibility. So we also we saw that there is a possibility, and you can use that. It's like moment, yes, to change a little bit situation, maybe to have more impact. And so we suggested some instruments like measures which could be applied. And the big group, I don't know, like if I can share now slides. Still like a little bit not clear with, yes. So this Lithuanian, yes. Wait
a second, I will share.
Yes, in this measurement, so it's a lot of data. Yes, I said very quickly the title, but there is very big group of measurements here. This in Lithuania. No, sorry, here. For this, which is balancing work and private personal life, so you ensure, and it's a lot of like, I think it's taken the Scandinavian model when you look for social policy which is concerning females, so you suggest measures for work. For labor, in labor section, but if you look for private sphere, so you develop and suggest measures for men. Yes, so I mean, these are suggestions. Some things are already implied, as we know. There is European Commission run directorate, and with it was even put in labor codex that we have, like, for example, if you have small children, so you have more days, and also you can have remote work, more possibilities, and also men are very encouraged. So, I mean, what you can see from other research, other colleagues' work, so there is a potentiality. But we cannot make big conclusion, yes, if it's a really big change. And when we saw this in the beginning for closing on gender pay gap, so COVID put one more generation, roughly speaking, yes. So we will close pay gap, like one generation more. We have to wait. Maybe again some changes come Like we have a lot of now conflicts, military conflicts. So it can be again a crash of all these predictions and other issues. So yeah, I have no answer. Just probably also have many reflections, but it would be interesting to study more, of course.
Yes. Okay. I think there are no questions in the chat. Any other questions in the auditorium or not? So then thank you very much, Rasa. And we move to the last presentation of this session by Valeria Virgili and colleagues, and it will be on the social dialogue in defense of vulnerable groups during the pandemic. So we are many of the talks today still revolve around COVID-19, so the impact is still very much important. Hi, Valeria, and will you be sharing your presentation from your computer, or should I share it?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, yes, please.
I think it's sharing.
1 second. Yeah, I think it's... Yes, now we can see it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. So, greetings to all present. My name is Valeria Virgili, and I'm an ADAPT Junior Fellow. I will provide now a brief overview of our research entitled Social Dialogue in Defense of Vulnerable Groups During the Pandemic, Comparative Analysis in Italy and Spain during COVID-19. This research was a product of a European project, the Defense Project, Social Dialogue in Defense of Vulnerable Groups in Post-COVID-19 Labour Market. And the mission of the project was to generate actionable knowledge to strengthen the protection of vulnerable groups across Europe and to strengthen the social dialogue in defense of vulnerable groups in accordance to with the European Pillar of Social Rights adopted in 2017. The project was guided by 4 research questions. The first was to refer to the identification of vulnerable groups in labor markets during the pandemic. The second relates to the measures that have been implemented for the employment and social protection of vulnerable groups during the COVID-19 crisis. Thirdly, the third research question was related to explore the role of social dialogue in the enforcement of social and employment rights of vulnerable groups during the pandemic. And fourthly, the opportunities that the COVID-19 pandemic presented for the strengthening of social dialogue in European member states and candidate countries. So the research was an interdisciplinary and international research that involved 12 countries. As you can see from this slide, we have 10 European member states: Italy, Spain, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Lithuania, Latvia, Finland, Sweden, the Netherlands, and Germany, and the 2 candidate countries, Serbia and Turkey. So a comprehensive comparative approach was adopted and all European regions were involved. With regard to the project methodology, the research integrated both qualitative and quantitative tools, utilizing data from policy datasets, documentary analysis, desk research, as well as semi-structured interviews. In particular, we at ADAPT have conducted 20 interviews with various Spanish and Italian organizations, encompassing government representatives, NGOs, public service entities, as well as representatives from trade unions and employers associations. Turning to our primary research outcomes, and starting with the identification of vulnerable groups during COVID-19, we found that the pandemic has disproportionately affected specific groups in the labor market of Italy and Spain. And it is important to note here that according to the project, we define vulnerable groups as those who have been particularly affected by the employment and social repercussions arising from the COVID-19 pandemic. So the main groups affected in Italy and Spain included women, people with no standard contracts, low-wage workers, low-educated individuals, interns, migrants, disabled people, and of course, young people. So by gathering data from the interview and database, we have identified a striking pattern. That is, the pandemic has not just exposed existing vulnerabilities in the Italian and Spanish labor markets, but it has also expanded the scope of what we consider to be vulnerable groups. What's particularly noteworthy is the overlap and convergence of different layers of vulnerability during the COVID-19 crisis. As you may note, the vulnerability of the identified groups arise from personal factors such as age, gender, nationality, education level, and disability, as well as from the precarious nature of one's employment contract and the position occupied in the labor market, since we know certain sectors have been hit harder than others by pandemic containment measures like shutdowns, reduced demand, or supply chain disruptions. So it is of paramount importance to note that these vulnerabilities often compound, resulting in a multifaceted and cumulative impact. Thus, our findings in this regard shed light on the intersections of vulnerabilities experienced by these groups and which continue to resonate in the pandemic's aftermath. With regard to the second research questions, so the measures that were implemented for employment and social protection of vulnerable groups during the pandemic, both Italy and Spain implemented measures oriented to workers in general, but also oriented to specific vulnerable groups that we identified. Those measures, the measures in both countries focus on job retention schemes, health and safety measures, and social security provisions. Both nations implemented stop of layoff, established protocols to ensure health and safety at the workplace, extended unemployment benefits, provided various allowances, and introduced work-life balance measures. What was the role of social dialogue in formulating and executing these the aforementioned policies, as well as the opportunities afforded by the pandemic to strengthen it? In answering this question, we found distinct scenarios. So distinct scenarios have emerged in Italy and Spain. In Italy, during the pandemic, the dynamics between social partners and institutions primarily centered on the information sharing and consultation. Notably, the government retained control over the political process, with the great exception represented by the health and safety protocol. That was a tripartite agreement signed by the main Italian social partner, and that represented a significant departure from the country's usual trend of abandoning tripartism. The effectiveness of social dialogue during this period varied depending on the maturity of existing structures. So social dialogue flourished where it was already mature, while where labor relations were not strong, there was no progress. In addition, several important measures to support income and employment and to protect health and safety at the workplace were also established at sectoral level by social partners. And effectively, what we know was that social dialogue in Italy was more evident in the numerous bilateral measures adopted by social partners. On the other hand, at the same time period, Spain saw a remarkable boost in social dialogue. Social partners played a crucial and proactive role in shaping key measures to protect vulnerable groups. And this approach enhanced the credibility and legitimacy. A new aspect to emphasize is the involvement of NGOs by trade unions to try to reach out more effectively to certain pockets of poverty and vulnerability. Additionally, it's worth noting that social dialogue in Spain progressed not only at national level, where 14 tripartite agreements were signed, but also at the regional level. And there is agreement in recognizing the highest and most important point of tripartite social dialogue in the regulation of Spain's temporary job retention schemes that are called the ESTES measures, temporary employment regulation procedures. In conclusion, the observed differences in the inclusion and the role of social partners between Spain and Italy call for further investigation into the political, historical, institutional, as well as the socio-economic and industrial relations context of the two countries. So we have just provided a preliminary understanding which required deeper examination. However, drawing from the literature on determinants of social dialogue, two main factors emerge to better explain this dissimilar partner. The first one relates to the varying degrees of legitimacy accorded to social partners in the two countries, and the second one refers to the country-specific institutional legacies. In effect, what we notice is that in Spain, social partners enjoyed a substantial legitimacy from policymakers, and the robust affiliations with specific governing parties during the pandemic played a significant but also an instrumental role in the active involvement. This is stark contrast to Italy, where over the past 2 decades, social partners have struggled to gain the same level of legitimacy from policymakers across the whole political spectrum. The Health and Safety Protocol in this regard emerged as an exceptional case, which confirmed the persistent pattern of path dependence in the role of social dialogue in Italy. At an institutional level, the main difference lies in the fact that Spain benefits from the establishment of a formal tripartite body, the Economic and Social Council, which, despite possessing only advisory capabilities, it facilitates the engagement of social dialogue. Conversely, Italy exhibits a lack of equivalent formalized structure that would enable such dialogue. The 1948 Constitution introduced a cross-sectoral tripartite body for social dialogue in Italy, the National Council for Economy and Labour, comprising representatives from unions and business associations. Nevertheless, the Council is limited to non-mandatory consultative functions, and most importantly, it is not recognized to facilitate consultation. As a consequence, instances of social dialogue in Italy predominantly occur through direct engagement between social partners and the government, organized on a case-by-case basis through governmental decisions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Valeria. And yeah, it was an interesting talk on the social dialogue. And if I understood it correctly, it seems to be very past dependent. So yeah, so now any questions online or here in the room? It was a lengthy session, so okay. Okay, then I will again abuse my role as a moderator of the session. Okay, so it's nice that your project also involves a variety of countries. So you gave a talk about these two cases. I didn't hear or missed this information. If you have at least some preliminary results from the other countries. So if I understood correctly, you show that in the two countries that you analyze, we have really this past dependency that actually even such a big shock as COVID didn't didn't push for change. So where there was social dialogue, it's increased, and where there was a lack of it, it still didn't flourish. So the question is if you have any results from other countries where actually COVID kind of had some impact of a increase in the social dialogue, and or if you see any mechanisms that could give a boost to it.
Yes, thank you. We have some preliminary findings, but the overall picture is that one of past dependence. There is no what we notice, what the other partners notice is that no great transformations in social dialogue happened during the COVID-19 pandemic. However, in countries where there was the role of social dialogue was present, we notice a bit enforcement of it, and as what we see, for example, in Italy. It's a country that over the last 2 decades abandoned tripartism, but with COVID, social partners were capable to reach an agreement. It was like 20 years that this did occur. However, in countries where social dialogue has only a minimal role and where the role is not institutionalized, there were no such very great changes.
Well, I think it corresponds to the Lithuanian story, because as well, it was like in the very beginning of the pandemic, it seemed that there was an increase in the social dialogue, and then I think it went to the business as usual again. So yes, indeed, this is not probably a very good news in the long term, but this is the reality. Okay, and we have another question here in the room.
Thank you for your interesting paper. I would like to ask you, like when you put vulnerable groups, and I noticed you had migrants. Could you tell more about this group in Italy, and maybe if you have data and the results on other countries? That would be very interesting. Thank you.
Yes, what emerged from our interviews, many interviewees identified migrants as vulnerable groups. In Italy, this is because, as well as in other countries, migrants have been at the front line, jobs at the front line during the pandemic, so they were more exposed to the health, but also employment repercussions from COVID-19. Literature stated that, of course, migrants are usually perform low wage work. So there are, like what I said before, we have intersections of different vulnerabilities when we speak of migrants, from their precarious employment relations, if they have. Maybe in Italy, for example, they are engaged above all in the irregular and informal sectors. So these adds another layer of vulnerability. they represent a group with different layers of vulnerability.
Okay, thank you very much. And we have one more question.
Thank you for your presentation. I would like to ask about the social security in Spain and Italy, because I understand that there has been a lot of changes in social protection during the pandemic. And first of all, quite many are talking about the new minimum income or vital income in Spain. Do you think that these changes have helped at all for these groups in vulnerable situation?
Yes, our interviewees, especially representatives from social partners, were, I have to say, were satisfied with what happened in Spain at legislative level. The increasement in the minimum wage has been welcomed with favor, and what they say is that they are seeing the efforts of their the efforts arising from finding a compromise in tripartite structures, and they were also expecting that a push for really institutionalization of a tripartite structure occurred in Spain, because I said before, the council has only a consultative function, and they really hope that with this government they can gain a more institutionalized role. So you said the increase in the minimum wage, but also they achieved various measures, like they adopted the ley rider, a law to better protect riders, or they did very satisfying tripartite agreement on remote work. So the various things that happen, and they seem to be satisfied with that.
Okay, did it answer the question? Yes. Okay. So thank you very much, Valeria. And I also see your colleagues are also present online. So thank you very much for presenting this paper. I think that we don't have any other questions, and we now deserved lunch. So thanks for all the presenters. Sorry for those who are online. We can't treat you with lunch. And for those who are here, the lunch is at the lobby. So thank you very much. And also join us for other sessions after lunch, and have a nice day.